Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Storyriem. I'm so happy you're here with me today. Take a slow, deep breath, let your shoulders relax, and let this story carry you back to a quiet country house in England, where one woman, writing in secret, would quietly change a world of literature forever. Now, close your eyes for a moment and picture the scene. It is around the year 1810. A small sitting room glows softly in the afternoon light. The walls are painted a gentle cream color. A warm fireplace crackles nearby. Two comfortable armchairs sit quietly in the room, and a window looks out across green fields and thick country hedges. Near that window, a woman sits at a tiny wooden table. She is in her mid-30s, with soft brown curls pinned neatly above her shoulders. She wears a simple white dress. She is not the kind of woman artists would call glamorous, but her eyes are bright, observant, and full of intelligence. They are the eyes of someone who notices everything. She is writing. Her pen moves quickly across a small sheet of paper. Every letter is tiny and carefully formed because paper is expensive, and she cannot afford to waste a single inch of it. On the page, two people are having a passionate conversation. A proud young man is declaring his love. A young woman refuses him. She is calm. She is fearless. She is unforgettable. Then, a sound. The old wooden door lets out a familiar creak. Someone is coming. The writer doesn't panic. Without a moment of hesitation, she gently places a large sheet of blotting paper over her work. By the time the door opens, she looks perfectly relaxed, as though she hasn't been writing at all. A servant walks through the room. The woman smiles politely. The servant leaves. She waits until the footsteps disappear, lifts the blotting paper away, and quietly begins writing again. She had actually asked her family never to repair that creaky door. She needed it. It was her warning. That woman was Jane Austen. She was writing in secret, and the pages hidden beneath that blotting paper would one day become one of the most beloved novels ever written, Pride and Prejudice. Stay with me, because this is the story of a woman who never married, never became famous during her lifetime, and never placed her real name on a single book she published. Yet, more than 200 years later, millions of people around the world still fall in love with her stories. Jane Austen was born on December 16, 1775, in the small village of Steventon, in Hampshire, England. It was a kind of peaceful place where life seemed to change very slowly. There were green fields, quiet country lanes, old stone churches, and families who had lived there for generations. Her father, George Austen, was a local clergyman. Every Sunday, he led church services for the village. He was a kind, thoughtful man who loved books. Her mother, Cassandra Austen, came from a slightly wealthier family and was well known for her quick wit and wonderful sense of humor. Jane was the seventh of 8 children, 6 boys and 2 girls. Their house was always busy. It was often noisy. Money was never plentiful. But there was one thing the family had in abundance: books. George Austen owned a library of more than 500 books, an unusually large collection for a country clergyman. And Jane was free to read every one of them. She read novels, poetry, history, and plays. She devoured the dramatic stories that were popular at the time. Stories filled with fainting heroines, mysterious kidnappings, secret identities, and unbelievable coincidences. She enjoyed reading them, but she also couldn't help laughing at them. Even as a young girl, she could see how exaggerated they were. By the age of 12, Jane had already begun writing stories of her own. They weren't serious novels. They were clever, funny, and full of mischief. She loved taking the popular stories of her time and turning them upside down, making fun of their dramatic plots and exaggerated characters. She wrote short novels, little plays, and humorous sketches, then shared them with her family. In the evenings, they would read her stories aloud together. The room would fill with laughter. While most 12-year-olds were still trying to understand the world around them, Jane Austen had already started making fun of it. The person closest to Jane was her older sister, Cassandra. The two sisters shared an extraordinary bond. They spent much of their lives sharing the same bedroom. Whenever they were apart, they wrote long, lively letters filled with stories about dances, neighbors, family life, and all the funny little moments that made everyday life interesting. Cassandra knew Jane better than anyone else. She was Jane's first reader, her closest friend, and the person she trusted most. As Jane grew into a young woman, her life looked much like that of many women in Regency, England. She attended dances. She visited friends and neighbors. She took long walks through the countryside. She sewed. She played the piano. And, like almost every young woman of her time, she waited, because in those days, a woman's future depended almost entirely on one thing: marriage. In Jane Austen's time, being born a woman meant your future was often decided for you. A woman could not own property in her own name. She had very few respectable ways to earn a living. University was not an option. If she never married, her life usually depended on the kindness of her father, her brothers, or other male relatives. Marriage wasn't simply about finding someone to love. For many women, it was the difference between security and uncertainty. The right marriage could provide comfort, stability, and a future. The wrong one, or no marriage at all, could mean a lifetime of dependence. Jane understood this better than almost anyone, and because she understood it so deeply, she wrote about it with a truth that still feels real more than 200 years later. Then, in December of 1795, something happened that would quietly shape the rest of her life. At a Christmas dance, Jane met a young Irish law student named Tom Lefroy. He was visiting relatives nearby while studying law in London. Tom was handsome, intelligent, and wonderfully charming. More importantly, he understood Jane. He had read the same books. He loved clever conversation. He could match her quick wit with one of his own, and every conversation seemed to make them laugh. Jane was only 20 years old. She was full of hope, curiosity, and dreams. That first dance led to another, and then another. Over following weeks, they met again at parties, dinners, and neighborhood gatherings. Before long, everyone noticed. People whispered about how often they danced together, how naturally they talked, and how happy they seemed in each other's company. Jane even wrote to her beloved sister, Cassandra, about Tom. She mentioned his elegant white coat. She joked that they had danced together, almost too much. She tried to make it sound like nothing, but sometimes the smallest sentences hide the biggest feelings. Behind her playful words, something much deeper was growing. Jane was falling in love, and from everything we know, Tom was falling in love too. But there was one obstacle standing between them, the same obstacle that appears again and again in Jane Austen's novels: money. Tom Lefroy came from a family with very little wealth of his own. His future depended on a rich great-uncle who was paying for his education and helping him build a career. If Tom married a poor clergyman's daughter with no fortune, he risked losing everything. Jane had no money either, no inheritance, no fortune, nothing society considered valuable, nothing except an extraordinary mind. Tom's family saw the situation as dangerous. Before the relationship could go any further, they sent him back to Ireland. Just like that, the dances ended. The conversation stopped. Jane and Tom never saw each other again. Many years later, Tom Lefroy became one of Ireland's most respected judges. By then, he was wealthy, successful, and powerful. Late in life, he admitted to a nephew that he had once been in love with Jane Austen. Then he smiled and called it a boy's love, as though those few winter weeks had meant very little. Perhaps they did to him. But for Jane, they seem to have meant far more. She never married. Not because she never had the chance. She did. Years later, a wealthy family friend named Harris Bigwither asked her to marry him. One evening, she accepted. But throughout the night, she couldn't sleep. By morning, she knew she had made a mistake. She returned to him and said no. It was an astonishing decision. She chose a life of financial uncertainty rather than a marriage without love. She chose honesty over comfort. She chose herself. And that choice changed literature forever. Everything she had experienced, the excitement of falling in love, the heartbreak of losing it, and the painful truth that love and money rarely walked hand in hand, found its way into her novels. Every time her characters struggle between what their hearts desire and what society expects, Jane is writing from experience. She wasn't imagining those emotions. She had lived them. By her early 20s, Jane had already begun writing full-length novels. Her first was called Eleanor and Mary Ann. She revised it again and again until it eventually became Sense and Sensibility. Soon afterward, she finished another novel called First Impressions. Years later, the world would know it by a different name, Pride and Prejudice. Writing the books was difficult. Getting anyone to publish them was even harder. In 1797, Jane's father proudly sent First Impressions to a London publisher. The reply came quickly. The publisher rejected it, without even opening the manuscript. Imagine that for a moment. One of the most beloved novels ever written was dismissed before anyone had even read the first page. Many people would have stopped. Jane didn't. She kept writing. She kept improving. She kept believing in her stories. Finally, in 1811, when she was 35 years old, Sense and Sensibility was published. But when readers picked up the book, they didn't see the name Jane Austen on the cover. Instead, it simply said, "By a lady." Just 3 quiet words. A woman had written this book, but society didn't need to know who she was. At that time, publishing novels could damage a woman's reputation. People might think she was improper, unfeminine, or try and step outside the role society had given her. So Jane allowed her work to speak, without her name. And it worked. The novel became a quiet success. Critics admired it. Readers enjoyed it. Jane earned around £140 from the book. It wasn't a fortune, but it was something she had never truly possessed before. Money she had earned herself. For the first time in her life, her writing had given her both an income and a measure of independence. Then came the moment that changed everything. In 1813, Pride and Prejudice was finally published. It was an instant success. Readers couldn't get enough of it. One reviewer described it as far superior to almost all the publications of the kind which have lately come before us. People spoke about Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy as though they were real friends, real neighbors, real people they had actually met. The first edition sold out quickly. Without realizing it, the world had fallen in love with Jane Austen. Even as Pride and Prejudice became one of the most talked about books in England, something remarkable remained true. Almost nobody knew who had written it. Even the Prince Regent, the future King George IV, owned copies of Jane's novels in every one of his royal homes. Her stories were being read by ordinary families and members of the royal family alike. Yet the author's identity was still secret. To the world, she was simply a lady. There is one wonderful story that captures just how hidden she remained. One evening, Jane attended a dinner party. A guest spent a long time praising Pride and Prejudice, talking about how brilliant the novel was and how much he admired its author. All the while, the author herself was sitting right across the table. Jane smiled politely. She listened, and she never said a single word. Can you imagine that? Someone is celebrating the greatest thing you have ever created, and you quietly keep your secret. That quiet confidence says so much about who Jane Austen was. During her lifetime, she published 4 remarkable novels: Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice, Mansfield Park, and Emma. After her death, 2 more masterpieces, Northanger Abbey and Persuasion, would finally be published. What made Jane's writing so special wasn't that she told extraordinary stories. It was that she wrote about families, about money, about manners, about love, about pride, about misunderstandings, about the small choices that quietly change an entire life. She didn't fill her books with battles, kings, or dramatic adventures. Instead, she wrote about drawing rooms, country walks, elegant dances, family dinners, and conversations where people often meant the exact opposite of what they said. Yet somehow, those simple moments became unforgettable. Her sentences seem effortless. But the more you read them, the more you discover hidden beneath the surface. With just one line of dialogue, she could reveal a person's entire character. One moment she would make you laugh. The next, she would gently break your heart. That was Jane Austen's extraordinary gift. She showed the world that everyday life is never ordinary, that a conversation across a dinner table can carry as much tension as a battlefield, and that the thoughts, dreams, fears, and choices of women deserve to stand at the very center of great literature. By 1816, however, life began to change. Jane's health slowly started to fail. At first, it seemed like ordinary tiredness. Then her back began to ache. She felt weaker with each passing month, though no one could explain why. Still, she refused to stop writing. She was working on a new novel called Persuasion. It tells the story of a woman who is given a second chance at love. Looking back, many readers feel there is something especially gentle and deeply emotional about this novel, almost as though Jane somehow sensed that her own time was growing short. By the spring of 1817, even holding a pen had become difficult. She bravely began one final novel, Sanditon, but after only a few chapters, she could write no more. The neat, elegant handwriting that had once filled thousands of pages became slow, shaky, and uncertain. In May, her family took her to Winchester, hoping the city's doctors could save her. Sadly, they could not. On July 18, 1817, Jane Austen died peacefully in the arms of her beloved sister, Cassandra. She was just 41 years old. Even today, historians are not completely certain what illness took her life. Some believe it was a serious kidney disease. Others think it may have been a rare form of cancer. For Cassandra, the loss was almost impossible to bear. Writing to a niece after Jane's death, she shared words filled with heartbreak. She was the sun of my life, the gilder of every pleasure, the soother of every sorrow. I had not a thought concealed from her, and it is as if I had lost a part of myself. Jane was buried inside Winchester Cathedral. If you visit her grave today, you might notice something surprising. The inscription praises her kindness, her faith, and her gentle character, but it never mentions that she was a novelist. It says nothing about the books that would one day be loved by millions. For a little while, it seemed the world still didn't realize who she truly was. But that would not last forever. After Jane's death, her brother Henry Austen arranged for her remaining novels to be published. For the first time, readers finally learned the name behind the words. Jane Austen. Even then, recognition came slowly. For many years, critics admired her books but thought of them as pleasant little stories. Only later did readers begin to understand just how remarkable her work really was. Jane hadn't simply written romance novels. She had written some of the finest studies of human nature ever put on paper. She understood pride, vanity, kindness, hope, self-deception, love, and she captured each of them with honesty, humor, and astonishing precision. Today, Jane Austen is celebrated as one of the greatest writers in the English language. Her novels have been translated into languages all over the world. Pride and Prejudice alone has inspired countless films, television series, stage productions, and new adaptations. Her portrait appears on Britain's 10-pound note. Her home in Hampshire has become a museum visited by people from every corner of the globe. Millions of devoted readers proudly call themselves Janeites. And perhaps the most touching part of her story is this: the woman who understood love more deeply than almost anyone, the woman who gave the world some of its greatest love stories, never found the lasting love she imagined for her characters. She shared a few unforgettable weeks with Tom Lefroy. Then he was gone. She turned down a wealthy man she did not love, and instead of choosing comfort, she chose honesty. She spent the rest of her life sitting at a small writing desk beside her beloved sister, creating the romances she would never experience herself. And now, my friend, our journey with Jane Austen comes gently to an end. She was never rich. She never held political power. She never had a private study where she could work in peace. She wrote in the middle of a busy family sitting room. Whenever someone walked in, she quietly hid her pages beneath a sheet of blotting paper. She published her books without putting her own name on the cover. She lived much of her life unnoticed by the world, but her words refused to stay hidden. They outlived the silence. They outlived the rules that tried to limit her. They outlived the world she lived in. And more than 200 years later, they are still changing lives. Maybe that's why Jane's story matters so much. Because every time you learn a new English word, every time you struggle through a difficult sentence, every time you keep practicing, even when it feels hard, you are doing exactly what she did. You keep going. Some days the words come easily. Other days they seem impossible to find. Jane knew that feeling. She once hid her writing beneath blotting paper. You may sometimes hide your confidence behind mistakes, but neither of those things last forever. Keep searching for the right word. Keep building one sentence at a time. Keep telling your story. Jane once wrote through her unforgettable heroine, Elizabeth Bennet, "I am only resolved to act in that manner which will constitute my own happiness." Jane chose her own path. Now you are choosing yours. So keep reading, keep speaking, keep learning, and above all, keep writing your own story. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Which moment stayed with you the most? Was it the creaky door that protected her secret writing? The winter romance with Tom Lefroy? Or the unforgettable moment when strangers praised her greatest novel while she quietly listened in silence? Leave your answer in the comments. I always enjoy reading what you think. Thank you for spending this time with me. There are many more incredible stories waiting for us, and I can't wait to share them with you. Until next time, take care of yourself and never stop learning.